Greetings, friends. You will notice that I have tagged this episode as explicit, and that's not because my guest or I were flinging around a bunch of cuss words, but it was that a term is mentioned in which I don't feel that parents of especially young children would be ready or willing to discuss just yet. So with that explicit rating, I feel like I can now include this quote while I'm at it. Jean-Luc Picard: "If we're going to be damned, let's be damned for what we really are." And you'll notice in this podcast, I haven't done any editing. There's no neat little transition music from one segment to another. And I thought that that's very fitting because there are no, what am I trying to say? There are no misconceptions that what I have to say is perfect or pretty or tied up with a neat little bow. I'm a work in progress, and I think this podcast is going to just reinforce that. So, but what I am, even though I'm flawed, I have a lot of love, and I hope that that comes through on this podcast. So stay tuned for Kristin Adiska. One more note, this was my first time to record using Zoom as opposed to what I usually record. So unfortunately, my voice will sound even shriller and more tinny than normal. So I think there's a lot of great information. Please bear with me and enjoy. If you're like me and you've wanted to make a podcast ever since podcasts became a thing, then I encourage you to check out Anchor. Anchor is what I use to create podcasts. I always thought I didn't have the know-how or the resources to create a podcast. The research made it all feel too overwhelming, and then I discovered Anchor. It's free, easy. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
Thanks for joining me in Sheffy's Sandbox. I'm April Scheffler, and I invite you to play with me and my guest today, Kristin Adiska. Welcome, Kristin.
Thank you, April. I'm excited to be here.
Well, in this segment, we pop into a virtual coffee house before hitting the beach. And being the benevolent host that I am, your order is on me. So what order do you give the barista?
Well, I would have to say this time it would be a pumpkin spice latte because I'm starting to feel the fall vibes, and I have to get one at least once a year, although I usually regret it later.
I have a friend who posted on Facebook recently about the whole pumpkin spice thing, where every year she finds herself like following the conversation boards about when is it being released and being one of the first people in line to get the pumpkin spice. But then with that very first sip, realizing that she's not as young as she was and that her body can't handle all that sugar. But it doesn't matter because she forgets it all for the next year and goes through it all again.
Yes, I definitely relate to that every year.
Well, now that you have your refreshing beverage, let's dive right in.
All right.
Now, on this podcast, we allow you to shine brightly. As Marianne Williamson said, your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. So as you play big, Kristin, are there any claims to fame, times that people might have seen you or your work?
Well, I often think of myself as just a very average person. And I often find myself, when I'm meeting someone, I'll hear myself say, I'm just a mom. But I have really come to realize that that I do have a lot of impact on those around me. I am special to the people that I come into contact every day. And so I'm trying to build on that. And I have garnered a reputation, so to speak, of being the resident chicken lady around these parts. I love to give advice on raising chickens, on permaculture gardening, on crafts. And I do think that just, ordinary people can make a lot of difference. So while I'm not internet famous, I am important to the people around me.
Exactly. And I think as people listen to the interview, they're going to find out, I think they're going to be inspired. And that's one of the reasons why I asked you onto the podcast, is because you are a normal person doing extraordinary things. And I think that's what we're all called to do, is be extraordinary in our little normal corners of the world. So
yes,
thank you
absolutely.
for being on the podcast today.
Thanks.
Now, for a linguistic tag, guests are asked to choose a word or phrase that they would like to hear used more often in everyday conversation. Something that doesn't get enough play or enough airtime. And the prior guest chose shenanigans. So you are tasked to try to somehow fit that into our conversation today. Got it?
Wonderful. I love that word.
Now, you also get to choose a word for the next guest to dance with. It could be a peculiar word that you find funny or that resonates with you. So what are you laying down for them to pick up?
So today, and I have to credit my husband with this because he is an avid collector of cool and interesting words. And so all I had to do was go straight to him and say, what have you written down in your book lately? Because he writes interesting words down. So I got this from him and I really love it. The word is sedulous, and it's spelled Sedulous. And it's an adjective meaning showing dedication and diligence. And so I think that's something that we can all try to apply in our lives.
Okay, so what occurred to me is that I'm very curious, what does your husband's word book look like? I'm imagining a small leather-bound, pocket-sized book that he carries with him.
That's exactly what it is. He doesn't necessarily carry it with him, but he's funny. He's a software developer, but he has interests in all kinds of things. A lot of people wouldn't know this about him, but he loves to write poetry and he loves to read. And so he just started writing down words that interest him. And it is a small little leather-bound book.
Does it have the gold on the edges, on the outside edges?
Oh, now that I don't know. I can't remember. I don't think so.
Okay, well, I may need to have him on the podcast as well. I hear poetry, and my ears, perk up because I love poems.
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, usually how I start the interview is including how me and the guest first met. And so we met at work many years ago. Yes. And I was a receptionist and you were being interviewed for a job in human resources. And both you and the other applicant seemed like outstanding people. But I am glad that you got it because I had the opportunity to observe you day in and day out. And now that I know this word sedulous, I can imagine your picture is next to the Anyway, so you are definitely a person of excellence. that I'm, again, honored to have on the podcast.
Well, thank
But
you.
yeah, so I moved on from that job, but we stayed friends on Facebook, and I was aware that whenever you got pregnant and you were about to have the baby, that you quit your work to be a stay-at-home mom.
Yes.
And I saw a post from you on Facebook recently. Well, maybe not recently, but it was a post that had a group of women and their children. And you had said that this was a group of mamas that saved you when
Yes.
you were dealing with a lot of loneliness at home. So can you speak to that?
Yes. Yes. And I think this is something that a lot of, especially first-time moms, go through. And you don't realize how lonely it can be. Particularly for me, I worked up into the day before I had my son, River. And so up until that point, my entire adult identity was wrapped up in my work, my career that I had been building. And then suddenly that all came to a very abrupt halt. And I found myself at home with this brand new tiny baby that I had never had a baby before. And so everything was new. And all the people that were my friends, and I considered them my friends, my social life, it was all at work. And I no longer had that outlet. And on top of that, we had just moved to a new house quite a ways out of the city. So even in my new neighborhood, I didn't know anyone. We were separated by a few acres, each of us. And so I found that it was just a very, very lonely time when you're stuck at home with, not stuck, but you're pretty housebound for a while, especially in the beginning with a small baby, full of self-doubt, not knowing many people around you, and then on top of that, I had to struggle with postpartum depression, which was just another thing to heap on. So it was a difficult time. Not only was I faced with new challenges, but I was also struggling with my own identity. And I happened to find this group of other moms that were going through the same thing. Just we found each other through a school, a small private school that was offering parent-child classes. It was just one day a week where we kind of just got together and hung out with our babies, and it was life-changing. And I have a lot of sympathy for new young moms who don't find a group like that.
So what were some of the things that connection brought to your life? Like, was it just these once a week get-togethers, or was it the text, like during the week between those meetings, or was it all of that?
Yes, it started out with just the once a weeks. We were all kind of shy and quiet, but eventually, started talking a little bit more during the class to each other as moms, and it was a lot of the sharing of, my kid is doing this. Is this normal? And then hearing somebody else say the same things, like, oh, it is normal, or it's not something I need to worry about. And then we would just babble the whole time, because we realized that, I haven't talked to another adult in, the last 8 hours, and this is awesome. And so just having that time to talk to each other, the time to share our concerns and realize that we're just normal.
Yeah. So,
or if something is concerning, having somebody. Yeah. Go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say that if you aren't finding things that, like that for you, be that person that makes it happen, or, at least sets the opportunity for it to happen.
Yes.
I know in one of the neighborhoods I had lived previously, when I was a new mom, and I was wanting to get play dates and stuff together, but I wasn't, maybe it strikes some people as a contradictory thing that I'm doing a very public, have a very public platform with a podcast, but yet I feel like I can be so introverted. And so for me not to be able to approach someone very easily, it was like I wasn't finding that support group. And so I just put it out there. You can use whatever type of social media. That's one of the cool things about technology.
Yes.
Is that I think at the time I was using Nextdoor, but you can also use some type of community groups that are on Facebook. But what I would do is I created a private group for parents, young parents, and so we would just post on to that group, hey, I'm headed to the park. If anyone wants to meet me, I would love to, for our kids to play together. So that's kind of how it started. And
Yes.
then you'll find some other people that do jump on it and be like, yes. And it could just be like one person at first, but, your kids playing together, what's your name? Where do you live? And that relationship starts to build, and
Yes.
you don't feel quite as disconnected. So see, what's around you. And if you're not finding a place that you think you fit, then, think about, like I said, creating that opportunity for others to find you.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I guarantee you there's somebody else out there that is feeling the same way as you are, or needing the same things that you are at that time in their life. And so, sometimes you have to get it started, but there are other people that need it just like you do.
Well, let's talk about the 100 Women Who Care chapter that you were or are a part of.
Yes.
Is that current?
It is current. We only meet 3 times a year. So we have kind of been on a big hiatus over the summertime, and also with the whole COVID thing, it's made it a little bit difficult, but we are actually getting ready to ramp up again for our second year of meetings.
So you were part of that, I can't remember what it was called, like a driving committee, or to get this off the ground. Yeah. So who actually invited you to get on board, or did you learn about this from another chapter and decide that you wanted to start one where you...
Yeah. So I have a good friend who used to be the director of Big Love Cancer Care. It was a small local charity that provided support for children and their families who have cancer, the families of the children who have cancer. And she found out about 100 Women Who Care because she was invited to make a presentation to 100 Women Who Care chapter in the Cypress area, which is another town nearby where we live. And she actually, from that invitation to present to their chapter, she won a very large donation to her charity. And so that was where she first found out about it. And she was just really impressed by the whole thing and started looking into it, started talking to the ladies from the Cypress chapter, and found out that anyone can start one of these groups. There are many of these 100 Women Who Care, or it doesn't have to be women, it can be 100 kids who care. Anyone can start one. The the premise of the idea behind it is that you get a group of people together and you can set however many meetings you want a year, but you get together, you invite 3 local charities. They come and they send a representative to make a very brief presentation. We try to keep it at 5 minutes for each charity. And they tell us about, what they do, how they support our specific community, and, what they would use a donation for. And all the members who attend the meeting, they get to vote. And whichever charity receives the most votes, we all write a $100 check directly to that charity. And so the goal is to have 100 women or more join this group. And so each time we meet, we're able to give $10,000 to a local charity, which is huge, especially to smaller charities that just provide support to a small area. It makes a really lasting impact for them. And it allows us as community members to be able to pool our money together and make a bigger impact for a charity, even though we're each only giving $100. It was a really cool concept. She wanted to get one started for our area, which is north of Houston, the Woodlands area. And she's like, I want to make this happen. Can you help me? And so we did.
Yeah, I've been really excited. That was one of the one of the first things that I saw you maybe step into. And so before we got started with our interview, I mentioned that we were 2 introverts getting together to make this podcast episode happen. And you were like, that the introvert tag really resonates. You really identify with that.
Yes.
But tell me what you said.
Yes. So, yes, I'm an extreme introvert. It's very easy for me to get just caught up in my own quiet little world of gardening and chicken raising. But part of my whole journey, when I did leave work and I kind of went through this identity crisis of like, well, if I'm not a human resources representative, who am I? What am I? What's my purpose in life? I spent a lot of the earlier years being home with River, really thinking about that. And at first I thought that my calling was to get into permaculture and homesteading. Like that was going to be my purpose. But through that journey, I kept finding myself being drawn more towards building community, because I was so impacted by like the women you mentioned earlier, that small group of moms that I got roped into, that really helped me get through the lonely years. I kept finding myself being pulled to activities, to things to help build connection and communities, because it made such a lasting impact on my life. And so even though I'm an introvert and my natural tendency is to just withdraw into my turtle shell a lot, these things keep popping up. And so I feel like this really is more of my mission in life, to help find the connections and build community around us.
And you volunteer at the SOS resale shop, is that true?
Yes. SOS is a local charity. They run a food bank in Montgomery County, Texas. And then they have the resale shop that is all of the donations that go to the resale shop and are sold go to funding the food bank in Montgomery County. And it's a really cool organization that I only recently got involved with. Actually, over the whole quarantine period is when I started getting involved with it, because my stepfather he works at the food bank, and he told me, we need a lot of help down here, and I think you might find it sort of healing during this time, because I'm the kind of person that, especially in time of crisis, I hate just sitting and being able to do nothing. I want to be able to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really how I got started. I just started doing it twice a week, going down either to the food bank or helping out at the resale shop. And it has been healing. It's good to be able to find ways that you can help.
And tell us what the acronym SOS stands for.
It stands for Society of Samaritans.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know it seems as though with the gardening, do you do any type of community garden work?
You know, I don't, but that is kind of something that has been at the back of my mind for a while. SOS actually does have a community garden. It's sort of small at the moment, but it's something that I have been thinking about a lot and trying to figure out ways that I can use my love of gardening to help others as well.
So are you in other types of community, is there any other community involvement at the moment that I'm not thinking of that you've been participating in?
No, those are the main things. Other than just the things that I do on a more personal level with my neighbors and my friends, of trying to keep us together, especially during the hard times, whether it's through forming a book club or just having people over to talk, kind of trying to force myself to get out there, because I know if I'm feeling lonely, other people are too.
Which brought us to kind of what I was wanting to talk to you about. There was a post where there was an invitation to share stories.
Yes.
So without kind of telling this story for you, because I really want to hear it in your own words,
Mm-hmm.
I want to hear about what inspired this whole concept and what you envision that looking like.
Yeah. So it all kind of, I started thinking about this a lot. I know I keep saying, with the whole COVID and the whole quarantine, but this time has forced a lot of changes on people, and it's also given me a lot of time with my thoughts. And a cousin of mine, a distant cousin actually, who I found on Facebook, so that's another positive thing about social media. He sent me a video. This was all kind of towards the beginning of the whole quarantining period, and the beginning of a lot of this unrest that we're seeing in our country. And he sent me a video that he thought I would be interested in. It was a man named Will Ford. He had just written a book called The Dream King, but the whole video was about the power of forgiveness and how it can really release you to meet your destiny. But anyway, what really struck me in this video was he told a story, and it actually happens to be about the Good Samaritan. He told a story that I've heard a million times growing up in the church, the story of the Good Samaritan. Even if you aren't religious, you probably have heard a mention of the Good Samaritan, where it was a parable that was told about a man that had been beaten and robbed and left for dead on the side of the road. And the priest walked by and didn't offer help. The Levite walked by, didn't offer help. And it was a Samaritan who came down the road and helped this man. He showed him mercy. And what was interesting about the Samaritan was, at the time there was immense hatred between the Samaritans and the Jews that had been going on for hundreds of years. And so the Samaritan was looked at as the outcast, the person from that other town that we don't associate with, but he was the one who showed mercy. So that's the gist of the story. I'm not very good at paraphrasing it. But what struck me more about it, because of course, we've all, anyone who has heard that story, we take it more as this is how to be a good neighbor. This is how to treat others. But what he added to that story was context, that prior to Jesus telling the parable of the Good Samaritan, he and his disciples had been trying to get to Jerusalem, and the way was through the Samaritan town. And because of the hatred and the racial prejudices between the two peoples, the Samaritans would not allow them to pass through their town. And of course, this made the disciples mad. How can they treat you like this? And so it was after experiencing that prejudice against himself, it was later that Jesus chose to tell the story of the Good Samaritan. And so what struck me about it so much was knowing more of that context, that he had just been slighted by the Samaritans, but when given an opportunity, he chose to use a story to portray the Samaritans as the heroes. And so it really struck home that we do have the ability to control the narrative of about ourselves, the stories that we tell about ourselves, the stories that we tell about other people. Instead of telling a story about himself or to puff him up or his own people up, he used the Samaritan as the hero in the story. And so it really struck with me that stories have a lot of power, and we could really pay more attention to the stories that we tell. And because especially right now, and I think a lot of people just feel kind of the ugliness, the attitude that is kind of hanging over our nation right now. It does seem very divided. And when you think about who is controlling the narratives that we're hearing, it is often the media, or things that you're hearing out on social media. But it doesn't have to be. We can control the narrative that we tell about other people. So that's what got me thinking about that. And I just really started feeling like if we could get people more out of their computers and out of Facebook and out of social media, which is not real life, and get them out into real life, just talking to people, meeting them and getting to know them and getting to know their stories, I think that a lot of the bad feelings that we're feeling right now as a country could be eased.
And you were adding to this whole idea of, meeting with others, getting people together with, physical presence, the element of fire. So why fire? Because you were seeing people, what you were envisioning, or people gathering around a fire, right? To tell these stories.
Yes. So, I figured this has just been weighing on my heart so much, but where else can I start but with the people around me? And so let's just see what happens if we gather some people together. I didn't really put a lot of thought behind why fire. It just seems, whenever I think about gathering, it's always around a fire for some reason. I love going out into my backyard, building a fire and just sitting around it and talking, where everybody is in a circle looking at each other, kind of at the same table, so to speak, or at the same level, and just sharing. So
you're envisioning that starting at least a group of your friends come together, they tell their story, And what I liked is that this is not, it's not intended to be a sugar-coated, like, this is how perfect my life is type thing. But neither are you really asking people to, I don't know, exaggerate the bad things either. But really, what is the story you're telling yourself?
Right.
And I think before we can change the story, we need to know what story we are telling ourselves, because we're each living that narrative.
Yes.
And so for us to change it, we need to first become conscious of what narrative we're living. Like, what is the story in our head? Like, who are the characters and the roles that we play? Yes. Am I the victim, or am I the champion for someone else? Like, what role have I been playing? What role have I put other people in my life? And then once you're conscious of that, then you can actually rearrange those characters, rewrite the story, where, the villains, maybe they find Jesus, in a way of speaking,
Right.
But as long as you're writing them in as the villain, that they're always going to be the villain, they're always going to be the oppressor, then by default, that already puts someone else as the victim,
Exactly.
So I that's part of my journey is figuring out what story I've been telling myself. And when I wrote the book, Sandra, the subtitle is A Healing Reimagining of the Babysitter from Hell. So, so I took this story, that was not very pretty in my history. And it's not as though I'm trying to do a revisionist history, but revisiting that over and over again, I found was not helping transform my present, or paving the future that I wanted. So, in that story, I found myself, I didn't even approach it with this in mind, but I created a hero. And so the chapters alternate between this imaginary hero in first person, and the next chapter will be the villain, first person. And so that was a huge step for me to write in the first person of this character in my past. To see what their motivations might have been. How could someone get to that point? Because, people aren't born this way.
Right.
So it was me trying to figure out what possibly could have happened to this person to get them where they were able. Because people do things. When people do bad things, they have a reason for it. The word I'm looking for is rationalize.
Yes.
There is always a rationality behind what you're doing. You don't just do something because you think that you're bad.
Right.
No one does something thinking I'm a bad or evil person. There's always a rationality behind what you're doing, and everyone else can know that it's not good or it's hurtful, but yet you still have your own rationality for it. So that was part of my journey, is finding out how in the world this woman could at all justify or rationalize what she did. And it was very much healing for me to alternate between this imaginary hero to the villain. And I ended up rewriting it where the villain, was not necessarily all that much of a villain, which again does not change the facts. Like, I am in no way looking at this through rose-colored glasses that what she did was okay, or condoning it, or whatever. But putting her in that villain space, otherizing her, from myself, was not helping me. It was not serving me. It was putting me in a victim mentality that I wasn't able to break free from. So simply by acknowledging what story, becoming conscious of what narrative I was telling myself, that I was that scared 5-year-old that was stupid and could never, do anything, and just felt disempowered. Until I dealt with that, the 39-year-old me, even though mentally I know better, emotionally, and how I approach life is still very much from this 5-year-old perception, because I hadn't dealt with it. And forgiveness for me is such a loaded word, but I have a lot of resistance to it. Because I think when we hear forgiveness, we think that we're letting someone off the hook, and that we're making what they did okay. And so I think either our definition of it needs to change, like the I don't know, the tone of it. There needs to be a new understanding of the word, or we need to find a new word.
Right.
Because forgiveness, at least you can speak to this too if you want, but I don't think that it is saying that what they did was okay. It's not letting them off the hook from potential consequences so that they can continue hurting someone else. That's not what it is at all.
No, I don't think that's what it is at all either, but it is not allowing your hurt or your desire for revenge or whatever it is to poison you anymore. Because when you hold on to those things, I mean, it is a poison that you bring up in your mind over and over and over. And until you are able to forgive and let it go, I don't think it has anything to do with saying what their action was is okay. It's more about you releasing it so that you can continue to live your life and not be poisoned by it anymore.
Mm-hmm. So I loved that idea of sitting around a fire talking about our real stories, and the potential behind that of changing what the story is. So I signed up for that right away.
I know, I'm so glad. And hearing what you have to say, I think about some of your stories that you've just hinted at here. I mean, I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, I think when people can get together and become vulnerable with each other, with people that they feel comfortable sharing. Yes. I mean, because you're not being asked to be vulnerable with someone who's going to take that information and use it against you. It's a small, intimate setting where even though you might not know the other people in the group, I know Kristin, who knows this person and trusts them. So, I would feel safe in that place to be vulnerable. And I love when other people can be vulnerable with me, because it came to light in a special way this past week, where I was able to realize when I had an interaction that irritated me. I'm like, okay, why is this bothering me? It's because I didn't feel like I needed a leader. I wanted a co-creator. Mm-hmm. I wanted someone who could be just as vulnerable as I was, mm-hmm. and we could create something new together. I didn't want that separateness. Okay, you are setting yourself as this, I don't know, this teacher, this leader, this separateness from me, which I think there's definitely probably a place for that. But what I'm needing at this point in my life are friends who will engage with me on an equal basis, become vulnerable with me, and combine our resource and talents to make something new. Because I just feel like there's been enough of me already otherizing, like not maybe necessarily a bad way, but this person knows what they're doing, or this person has their stuff together,
Yes.
their life looks perfect, so
Yeah.
I'm tired of otherizing people, both for bad and good. Like, there is so much alike, and I'm ready to rewrite my story and my narrative in which we are co-creators and can be vulnerable with each other.
Yes. I mean, I'm so excited because I think you just really, really get what I'm trying to accomplish by just having these fireside chats. I think the more we talk to each other, it will be undeniable how much we have in common, how much we are the same. We are people with feelings and hurts and struggles and great accomplishments and talents and so many things. And I think especially lately with us having to be so separate physically, even because of quarantining and things like that, it's so easy to just allow our minds to completely run away with the narrative about certain people, bad and good, just like you were saying, oh, this person has it all together. They don't have any problems in their life. And so I really am wanting to get those conversations, those stories opening back up again and see what comes out of it. And like you said, let's start here and practice. Let's practice it in a small group where we can be vulnerable. But it is my hope that you'll leave that group willing to practice it more with others around you. And hopefully it will spread. I think it will. I mean, when people feel like they are being seen as a human being, it's infectious.
Right. And so I wanted to get you on the podcast beforehand, before one of these fireside chats, to get your vision, what inspired you, what you see that looking like, what you hoped to get out of it. And then I want to bring you back on after, a fireside chat or two has happened, and then see if you were, if it looked like you thought it would, if it ended up surprising you in ways that it was, or it did or did not meet your expectations, and what you might change about it. So I am super excited to have this conversation and then to pick it back up after you've had some of these fireside chats.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited too. I'd love to do that.
So, one of my questions I had written down is, what is your story that you have been telling yourself, and how has it changed? Which you could answer that, but then I'm thinking to myself, maybe I'll just wait to a fireside chat.
Yeah, so I'll definitely get into more of that in fireside. But part of my whole thinking around this, and I'm a ruminator. I mean, I think things to death. I live so much in my head, and so when I did hear that story and I started thinking about the story about the Samaritan, and I started thinking about the stories that we tell ourselves, I really started analyzing the stories that I have been telling about myself to myself for years, decades, and again, going back to some of the stuff that you said, first we have to acknowledge what those stories are, so that we can analyze them and then decide if the narrative does need to be reshaped. And I've one of the big things, this, that I've told myself my whole life is that I am lazy, that I'm a lazy person. And I look at everybody else as, or a lot of other people around me as, man, they have it so together. And if I should be like them, I should be like this person, I should be a better housekeeper. And this is a story that I told to myself for decades. And it's not a good story to tell yourself. It's not helpful. And I have had to reshape my way of thinking and looking at my nature and how I can work with my true nature, that I'm not necessarily lazy, but I do work in different ways and different patterns. And just,
can I ask you something?
Yeah.
So this whole concept of being lazy, I find that very interesting because I haven't seen that in you at all. But did someone ever tell you or insinuate that you were lazy?
Maybe maybe growing up. I feel like it probably started in childhood, and I don't say this to fault my mom at all, but my mom is an extremely neat and orderly person, impeccable housekeeper. Those are just the sort of things that were always modeled to me as a child, and I never met up to those standards. So if I were to trace it back to the beginning, it probably started then, when I was like, I'm not neat. I don't like to do these things. I was a very creative, kind of a messy creative type growing up. And those kind of things, sometimes they just stick with you and they compound in adulthood. Like every time you fail at something or you look around at your house and it's not the way you want it, just goes back to that story that you've been telling yourself.
Right. That's self-talk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's good to look at yourself honestly. I know where my faults are, but there are also some things that they're not helpful to tell yourself.
Right, exactly, because what you see is often what you expect, because we're all about patterns. Human beings are about patterns. And so if you're telling yourself that this is the way it's always been, then there's a certain amount of security and safety in continuing that pattern.
Yes. Yeah. This is just how I am,
Yeah.
Or I will never be able to do this or that, because it's just.
And we change, we're not the same people as we were yesterday, and we're not going to be the same tomorrow that we are today. So we, why would we hold ourselves to, what was in the past?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there was, so I have a couple of things going through my head, but one of those is what you were saying about the housework.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been a particular challenge for me as well, because I know some people in my life who they're very their houses are so clean, but I think to myself, like, we all have different energies and different priorities, and by me doing this podcast, I'm not making my own almond milk. Like, I have a friend who's probably be listening to this, who makes her own almond milk. And yes, I'm talking about you. I really envy, and I told her this face. I'm like, I wish I could be more like you. But if I'm doing this podcast, that's where I'm putting my energy. I can't be creating meals from scratch at the same time. I can't be vacuuming. I can't be, there are so many other things that I can't be doing because I've chosen to put my energy in a certain channel, like in a certain place. And if I allow that, time is limited, and, look, if I get to the end of my life and I look back, was I happy spending those hours vacuuming and dusting and putting my priorities where other people's priorities were? Or or am I happy that I let like the housework go, and we did eat out a little bit more often than home cooked meals, by me being able to write,
Yes.
some of my projects, being
Yes.
able to research things that are important to me, by having these podcast conversations with people I really get something out of, something from. So with energy and time being finite, am I okay with not being someone else? And the answer is yes. Like, so whenever I find myself having these shoulds, come up, like you were saying, then I'm like, I try to just cut myself some slack and be like, I'm doing April. Like, I'm Apriling, as one of our former podcast guests said, he's, this is just what Toms do, he tells me. So I'm Apriling in this life, and no one else can be me. So why would I try to live like someone else if part of me believes that I have something special or unique to contribute?
Yes.
Like me doing housework or this or that, if that's not where my heart and my energy naturally flows into that, then I'm not growing from that. And the people around me are not going to be getting anything from it either. Like, because the energy is going to be more of anger and frustration. Because I don't know about you, like whenever I start to clean, I see more stuff. Like nothing is ever perfect. And so I would just have this resentment that I'm not able to invest this time into this project or that project because I'm doing this or that, when maybe I can let it go.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And that is a realization that I have come to over time. And it really came down to, what is a Kristin? What am I like, and what are the things that are most important to me? Because I could be cleaning all day and have a perfect house, but I would be a very angry person. And so I did, and like you said, when you heard me say that I've always told myself I'm lazy, and your reaction was, wow, I would never describe you as such, or, I don't see that at all. And when I came to that realization that other people don't see that in me either, because they do see all the things that I do. And I need to see the things that I do as well, and put those in the right priority, because I was putting other people's priorities ahead of mine. So a lot of it is just realizing, like, what is your nature, and working within that.
Exactly. And then the second thing that was going through my mind at the same time was when I asked if someone had called you lazy in the past. One of my own personal experiences came to mind it wasn't this past week, but maybe, anyway, here recently, someone had kind of just insinuated that I owed them something. And it was a very small thing, but I felt a lot of resistance to that. And so I have been really discovering the value of asking yourself, like, whenever because if it weren't true or there was nothing there, like, it would just go off my back, like water off a duckling, it's like, right. It wouldn't even bother me, but there was resistance there. Like, why is this bothering so much that this person, I feel like they're saying I owe them, or that this exchange between the two of us hasn't been, equally beneficial. Mm-hmm. And so it required me to think back, and it came to when I was 19, I think. And there was this woman that was helping me get ready for my wedding. Mm-hmm. And she didn't actually attend church because the smells, people's perfume and things just really wrecked her allergies up. So what she considered her ministry was, helping plan things like this, like weddings or baby showers or stuff like that. So, and I had absolutely no money whatsoever. And so whatever happened, like the church community had come together, they had made my cake, they had put together a potluck afterwards. Right. Every single thing was provided by somebody else. And it wasn't because, it wasn't because I expected it of them, but I was trying to allow them to, serve in what way they wanted to help. Right. I definitely was not asking for it. Anyway, so I met up with this woman at a craft store, and she was asking me, to make decisions about, did I want this or that? Do I want decorations on each pew or every other pew, and what color? And I guess for one thing, I was being, 19, 20, and some of that I probably didn't care about. I can't remember. I knew what color I liked, right. But I was approaching it with that every single thing they were doing was a gift. Mm-hmm. Like, so I didn't feel like I was in a position to say, yes, this is what I want, this and this and this, and make it happen this way, Right. So I wasn't giving her, I guess, as much direction or input as she was liking. And so anyway, ended up looking, people who were watching this, I think it was very interesting and entertaining for them. But something happened where I ended up running out of there to escape, getting in my car, and she's rushing out after me, telling me to stop, like screaming to stop and listen. And I think she kind of like throws herself onto the hood of my car as I'm trying to back out. And she was telling me that there are two types of people in this world, givers and takers. And you are a taker. You're a taker. And that just stuck with me. Yeah. And so when more recently, this person was again insinuating that I owed them something, that I hadn't been, like I needed to make good, like where this was equal, an equal exchange of energy. I was like, my whole resistance is probably back to, 20 years now, when this woman who did not know me at all, called me a taker. Yeah. I internalized that. I was like, she must have seen something about me. And I think this goes back to what you were saying, that, if we hold on to a certain identity, I don't know. And it can be not even us, really. I don't feel like I was being a taker, like quite the opposite. And for someone to speak, place a judgment on that, right. I gave it a lot more weight than I know, like mentally I should have. But again, it's not about your thinking mind, because your thinking mind knows better. It goes right. back to your emotional body, like the response to that. I was devastated, and I've just held on to that this whole time. What if I am a taker? I'm not.
Yeah, you're not. But yeah, I think the more practice, when things trigger you like that, and the more practice you have of kind of going back and being able to try to identify where it comes from, is just helpful. If you could just look at it objectively and say, okay, this is why I'm feeling uncomfortable, but this is not true about me. So goodbye, you know. The more you can look at it objectively like that. And then, as we were talking about earlier, taking a look at that woman and trying to think or imagine what in her life caused her to react that way. You know, because to me, that doesn't sound like a normal reaction either. Yeah.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast in which they were talking about, I'm probably going to mispronounce it, but the Gestalt method, and where you have the empty chair. And sometimes the why questions are not always the best, because again, that puts you into like your mental thinking, like your mental processes, when so much of our trauma and difficult experiences need to be on a physical and emotional level, because you know, so much of the time we lead with our minds, and our minds don't always know the best way to proceed. And so I'll put a link in the podcast, but I found it such a revolutionary thing. But sometimes
I'd love to read that.
Yeah, it was so fantastic. And so when I did the open chair method a couple of days ago with this, again, with some resistance, I was feeling, I sat down and put this other person in that chair. And so instead of asking her so much why, because that again would put me in my thinking mind, it was more declarative stuff. You're supposed to say, you know, this is how I feel, you know, and identify in your body like where that energy is, like and kind of let it out, experience it, like actually lean into those feelings, because so often we are told that certain feelings are undesirable, and if you feel those feelings, then you need to put a lid on it, just kind of hope for it to go away, when it doesn't.
Right.
Everyone who has felt anger or some type of betrayal or irritation, even if you just put a lid on it, it just builds pressure.
Absolutely.
There's nothing productive about not leaning into those feelings. So true, it may not be very productive to actually confront that person with the force of, you know, all of that. But if you're doing it in an open chair concept where the person's not there, but you are able to, you know, express without, you know, editing yourself.
Right.
Like, this is how I feel, blah, blah, blah. You said this, you know, it made me feel this way. It was very productive for me. So like, even if this offending party were to come to me and want to talk about it, I'd be fine with that. But I don't feel like I really need to, because I've already talked it out.
You've already processed. Yeah, you've already processed it without damaging your relationship.
Right, exactly. Yep.
That's really interesting. I definitely see the value in that.
One of the things, oh gosh, that's been on my heart really strong lately is the cycle of hate. And it's not always necessarily because of, you know, being the victim, but so like you have the triangle of disempowerment. Have you heard of that?
No, I have not.
Okay, so there is something called the triangle of disempowerment, in which there is this cycle where there are three parties. There's the persecutor, the, you know, which is often labeled as the problem, the dominator, the one that you can easily blame. And then you have the victim, who is poor me, powerless, my dreams have been lost or denied me. And then the other corner of the triangle is the rescuer. So they're telling the victim, poor you, and they fear not being needed. So they get some type of validation out of being needed in this triangle of disempowerment. And so what's kind of cool is that you can take this triangle, flip it, where you have more of a pyramid right here. And the persecutor then becomes the challenger. The rescuer becomes more of a coach, and the victim becomes more of the creator. So I think sometimes whatever the concept is that people are taking sides, if you don't necessarily identify as the persecutor, well, let me just say this. If you don't identify with the problem at all, so you don't really see that there is a problem, and so you're not identifying as the rescuer either. It could be that you're being labeled as the problem or the persecutor. And so by flipping this, by you becoming the challenger instead, you are empowering the previous victim. You're flipping this on its head. You're asking the victim to voice what they want. And in that triangle of empowerment, now that rescuer is not telling the victim, poor you. What they're doing is supporting and assisting and asking questions. How will you do it? Like giving that back to the victim, who has now become a creator. They own their power to choose and respond, and they say, I can do it. They can say, I can do it.
Wow. I love that. I've never heard it described that way, but it really plays a lot or relates a lot to Stoicism. I don't know if you have read or looked into Stoicism, and I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself, but that was actually one of the teachers or teachings that I wrote down for having impacted my life.
Well, so I liked one of your recent posts was, let me read what I said. There was a video you had reposted saying, hate cannot drive change.
Ah, yes.
Okay, so it immediately made me think about the triangle of disempowerment dynamic, where there is a victim. So anytime that there's a victim, you by necessity have a persecutor. You have a problem person. And you have people, which has been on my heart, because I know people who are stepping into this rescuer role.
Yes.
Where they're telling the victim, poor you.
Yeah. We're seeing a lot of that.
And they mean well. They see an opportunity for change, where again, things, they're not, and I'm not saying things have been okay. Like the ways for people in certain groups, or, and that changes from time to time what the topic in question is. But yeah.
But how do you get the victim to not, like, at what point does the victim stop being a victim? How if they don't ever switch into that creator mode, I guess. It's very difficult to define. I'm trying to think what I'm trying to say here, but you know, if you only see it as poor you, or there's this victim and I need something to make something will make everything better, or something needs to make everything better. What is that, and when is it enough that you aren't a victim anymore? Right. I don't know the answer, but looking at it as I can create the change, I don't know, to me that just, well, it is empowering, and it sounds so much more hopeful, I guess.
Right, because you're owning that power to choose and respond. Mm-hmm. So I know some of the things that have happened in my life, I have definitely been stuck in this triangle of disempowerment because I was a victim. Mm-hmm. And then as soon as I went through, like, there's one therapy session in particular I can think of where they tried to write me out of the victim role. Believe that? They tried to do that to me, Kristin. And I was like, but what happens to my whole narrative? Mm-hmm. Like, I felt like this death of ego. Like, it's really hard to explain, because they weren't trying to say that this didn't happen to me, but that I was no longer a victim. Well, heck, if that's been my whole identity, like me being, you know, coming from a poor family, and, you know, there being abuse and neglect or whatever it was, mm-hmm. you know, who am I then? If I'm not a victim that's fighting for something, I don't know that I'm explaining it very well, but if I'm not a victim, then that means that there's not a persecutor. And so I was like angry that they were taking that role from me, because that meant that the person who had done me wrong was mm-hmm. being let off the hook as the persecutor, right? Because they have to hold those polarities for each other. In order for them to be a victim, you know, in order for there to be some abuser or someone who's wrong, there has to be a victim. Yeah. So in order for me to switch this on its head and me to become a creator, like, I am now owning my power to choose and respond to what happens to me, mm-hmm. then that makes that person who was the persecutor or the abuser now the challenger. Okay?
Absolutely.
So I'm like I was like, I have a lot of resistance again to that, because I felt like it was letting them off the hook.
Yeah.
I wanted them to be punished, you know? But so I'm looking at a little graphic right now that says the challenger, which you'll remember was the persecutor in the other triangle, calls forth learning and growth. It provokes and evokes action. And so, mm-hmm. yeah, so if I look at this person or situation as having been an opportunity, oh gosh, like, I don't even want to say it right now, but like, that they let me take a look at what I was. Am I a taker? You know, if we are never challenged, then we do never grow. We might not ever grow into, you know, or step into or grow into a leadership role in our own life. Because even if you don't lead others, you definitely, I think you're being asked to take leadership in your own life. Mm-hmm. Choosing to look at them as a challenge.
Yes. An opportunity to grow. An
opportunity, exactly.
Yeah. That's hard. That's hard to do. But it's true. I believe it. Absolutely. It's true that if you can look at it that way, you will grow. You absolutely will.
And so I can appreciate people in this empowerment, this triangle of empowerment, who want to come into not as a rescuer or a hero role, but as a coach, right?
Mm-hmm.
To support and assist, and asking me, how will you do it?
Yes. Yes.
How will you do it? And support me and assist me in that. And so I think what I've been dancing around, and I think everyone who's listening knows what I've been dancing around, is that the particular triangle of disempowerment that the collective is focusing on right now
Mm-hmm.
has been that of racial injustice.
Yes.
There's also been a big emphasis on child exploitation,
Mm-hmm.
which, again, no one is saying that things are what's been going on is okay, but like, I guess maybe let's approach that one first. So it's not that child exploitation hasn't been happening. What we have here is an opportunity to assert and emphasize what is important.
Mm-hmm.
Are children people? Are children worth listening to?
Right.
Should children have a voice? So like, these are all paradigm shifting things that something even as ugly as child exploitation can bring to the now. Right? Because we can't fix or change what has happened.
Mm-hmm.
And like, a lot of moving forward is not going to happen by shaming people, or it would just make it go further underground. I think how true change happens is by us stepping in as that coach and empowering the collective to talk about, their experiences, abuses that they have experienced as a child, perhaps, but more important than that, placing more and more emphasis on seeing children. Because maybe you were raised with this. I feel like there was still plenty of this when I was growing up that I was affected, but children were to be seen and not heard, I guess is where I'm coming from.
Yeah, definitely.
And that, children needed to shut up and listen, because what did they know? They haven't been alive for very long, So just watch and learn is basically, kind of a lot of the programming I got. So Kristin, I'm afraid someone's going to think that I don't, I'm not wanting to step up and protect children, where I'm not wanting to step up for those who have been marginalized just because of the color of their skin. And it's not. I want to place things in a different dynamic.
You want to empower them.
I want to empower them. So instead of stepping in when it comes to this racial injustice as a hero or a savior, or saying, yes, you've been wronged, right? Which they have been. Collectively, there's been a lot of wrong done to them. But instead of doing that, like, the movement, the momentum happens by going to them and saying, of course you can do this,
Yes,
like,
absolutely.
And how can I help you doing that? It's not in turning them into a victim and everyone pointing their finger at the persecutor. Right. So we're going to change the persecutor into the role of the challenger. So, do I, as a culture, does my specific culture deserve to be heard? You know, are we smart? Are we nonviolent? Are we loving?
Right.
Or are we criminals? You know, I don't know. Like, I think there's a lot of programming. Like, let me put it in a, I think I'm not explaining this well, but if we go to the whole idea even of sexual inequality, I don't talk to my daughter about rape. You know, and granted, she's still very young.
Right.
But I'm not instilling in her fear.
Right.
Like, I empower her. You know, I'm thinking about, you know, her karate classes, but that's, you know, I just empower her, not by repeating an old narrative.
Right. Right.
So she's not going to be going into life thinking I'm less physically strong, I'm vulnerable, I have historically been treated unfairly because of my sex. You know, there's a pay discrepancy. You know, I don't want her going into life like that. I want to be that coach. Instead of a rescuer, I want to be that coach and be like, of course you can do it.
Yeah, if you want to set your mind to it, and then yeah, you can do it.
And
absolutely.
not in contrast because of this. Not saying, of course you can do it even though you're a girl. You know? Because, right? Like,
right.
even if you aren't a man, of course you can do this, because you're taking the power away from that. Like, you're still, in a way, reinforcing this horrible narrative. Like, why does it matter at all? Why is it coming into the conversation what your sex is? Why is it coming into the conversation what your race is? You know? Because I think race and culture play a really important part in our human experience. I think they should be celebrated, but not in to the exclusion of someone else. So, like, if we go to, and I'm stretching here, Kristin.
Sorry, I'm just like I'm just soaking it all in. I love to hear your thought process on all of this, and I'm right there with you.
When it comes to cultural misappropriation, right? I have found myself hesitant, or like, oh my gosh, you know, do I need to step on tiptoe here because that's I'll be labeled as being culturally insensitive. Like the other, I can't remember if it was last month or something, I put a head wrap on.
Oh, right. I remember that. It was such a cute picture.
I thought it was fun. I just felt like I wanted to, I needed to. But at the same time, you know, it can get as extreme as I was afraid someone was going to say, you know, what are you doing?
Right.
And I was thinking, you know, well, if we're going to go that far back, I think I have some Polish ancestry, you know?
Right.
I want to wear, you know, something on my head, you know, so if I want to wear a specific style of clothing or have my hair in a certain thing, in a certain way, or this or that, I want to experience human. I want to experience, or, you know, and express the world, become a world citizen. And I think if we can welcome people into our experience instead of creating this separateness or otherness, I just feel like so much more change can happen. So if we take these challengers in our life that we had previously viewed as persecutors, and we are willing to take that scary step away from victim, because that's the narrative that we feel has given our life motivation, because if you are angry, right, you often are motivated to make a change.
Yes. Yeah.
So I felt like a lot of that fire had been taken from me. But no, like these people or situations, or like in my case, even poverty in my childhood, those were all, now I'm trying to put them, I have not been successful, completely successful, but I'm in the process of putting those in the challenger role, so that now I have a triangle of empowerment. So I'm trying to decide, okay, what this situation or this person that angers me, that I feel injustice in whatever form it is, what is going to provoke me to action? Yeah. I'm trying to take a more constructive aspect to all of these stressors / abusers, social limitations and constructs, and instead make them just catapult me into action and become that beautiful butterfly.
Yeah, because you're right, anger can be a motivator, but too often the motivation, that the anger points your focus backwards instead on that person or that thing that is making you angry, that situation. And so it can be a motivator, but I find that it doesn't point you in the right direction. It doesn't propel you into the future. It distracts you too much to the past, into things that have already happened that you can't change.
So utilize the open chair, feel into those feelings, because again, though they need to have an outlet. Like they're not going to be released all on their own just by hearing someone say, oh, you gotta
let that go.
Yes, let them go. You need to forgive and practice, that's what all, about being a good person is. And like, okay, wow. But you know what? Lean into those feelings, grab from there, what is it that's bothering me? What's triggering me? Because if there is no trigger, maybe if there was no belief system that part of me bought into, then I'm tempted to say that it wouldn't bother me.
Right. Yeah, I mean, so much of forgiveness, that word, it really has nothing to do with the other person. It has to do with you, and when you have to take a hard look at yourself, and feel those feelings, and then make a conscious decision to move beyond that, to change that obstacle into the way that you're going.
Another thing I have really found to be an energy saver or a protective mechanism is something that I heard, that so much of what we feel is not even our own feelings. Like we're taking on the anger and of the society and what's going around us.
Yeah.
So like we should feel angry. Maybe we feel like, okay, we know of something, an injustice, and we feel angry, and so we just feed into that. We fuel into that, when honestly, a lot of that is not our fight.
Yeah.
Like if we were to save that energy for what is our fight, for the injustice that we see in our direct connections.
Right. Yes.
Then we could step in and be that coach to them. Of course you can do it. How can I, how are you going to do it? And how can I support you?
Yes. I've thought that so many times recently, watching the news and the chaos. And
I can't watch the news because I find myself taking on all this grief, all this overwhelming anger from other people, and it's not even my emotion. Like, so I feel like if I do start feeling overwhelmed, where my body's going into this kind of inflammation response, I don't know, like I start to feel, you know, fatigued and kind of like tired, and I'm like, you know what, I haven't done anything. Maybe it's because I'm feeling everyone else's feelings.
Yes. Oh, I know. I have to go. I really minimize my time watching the news, my time on social media, because it affects me physically as well. I tend to really see, you know, the hardships in the world, and it can really affect me. And that's part of a lot of why I just really wanted to do this fireside sort of story sharing, because I realized like it isn't my fight, or I can sit here feeling all the anger in the world and it won't make any difference. But what I can do is talk to the people that are right next to me. And that could make a difference. That actually could make a difference.
Because reality is formed from our focus, right?
Yeah.
And so I feel like I'm so much more of a healthier person focusing on the relationships in my life. So whether, you know, regardless of the color of their skin, like this social injustice, is that my reality? No. Like, I definitely grew up with some people who probably planted some seeds, you know, stereotypes about different groups of people. But, you know, when I look at, well, what's my reality? And I'm not saying this is not someone else's reality, because it definitely is. Like the news, like the abuses are happening, but it's not my reality. My reality is that people of different color skin are heard and seen and loved and acknowledged for what they bring to the table. So, like, what type of reality are we feeding? And if I feel more equipped with that perspective, okay, what is my reality? What's going on in my circle? That if there is an injustice, I feel like I have more resources to step in and help that person as a coach.
Yeah, absolutely. You can make a much more, a huge impact focusing your energies there with people in your community than you can all over the world, and especially if you have expended all of your energies feeling angry or feeling guilty just from watching the news, you know. So we do have to be we have to be guardian of our time and of our energy if we do want to make an impact.
Oh gosh, Kristin, I feel embarrassed. I feel like I do this sometimes, so it's not like it's a new thing. But
Are you Apriling? You're just Apriling?
I'm Apriling. I've done this before, but not to this extent where I just go off and like on this tangent, you know,
without
realizing the time. It's just been
I love it. It needed to be said.
It's just been so heavy on my heart because lots of reasons.
Yeah. But, well, we can share that around the fire.
I look forward to that.
I do too.
Okay, let me go back to my script so I can see where I am. Okay, social presence. How can people find out more about you, Kristin, and follow what you're making in your own sandbox?
Well, like I said, I don't really have a big social presence, but anyone is welcome to email me, or I hesitate to put out my Facebook info because I do keep it fairly private for just family, and I put pictures of my my kid up there a lot. So
yeah, no worries. And like all these links to other things that you are contributing to,
right.
I'm going to put those.
I'd love to have anybody who's interested check out the 100 Women Who Care. I can send you the link to the 100 Women Who Care North Houston chapter, which is the one that I'm involved with. But I can also give you the one for just the national, the person who got the whole concept started nationally, if anybody wants to start their own chapter.
Cool.
And then to links to SOS, if anybody feels led to get involved there. They always need volunteers. It's a great organization to really just, see who's in your neighborhood that needs help, and get to know them.
And then as I know with Fireside, as we actually, meet and you, learn some things from how that actually, works better.
Yes.
We'll have you on again, and by then you'll have something where you can share or, a link to find out more. But yes, I think that this just in itself, like getting the conversation started, is very, very helpful.
Me too. I'm glad you agree.
Well, let's go to this segment that you are prepared for, teachers. So I love how in the Lifestylist podcast, Luke Story ends his pods asking his guests this question. So I'm including it in my podcast as well. Okay. Who have been 3 teachers or teachings in your life that you might share with our audience that they could go research and also learn from?
Okay. So when you first told me about this segment, I thought, oh, that's going to be hard. And then I realized that it was really very easy. 3 things popped into my mind very quickly. The first one, first teacher, her name is Marcus Aurelius, and she, you can find her website at, it's tierrasoul.com. And I came across her actually right after River was born. We had moved out to the country, and I had this dream of pursuing kind of a life of homesteading, and I wanted to learn permaculture. And so I signed up for her class on permaculture, which ended up really changing my life in so many ways. So not only did I learn about permaculture, but she really touched on a lot of things, just sort of a whole lifestyle. She was the first one who introduced me to this concept of the problem is the solution, which I think fits really well with your triangle reference, triangle of disempowerment. But starting to look at things that I used to view as problems. But what if it was actually the solution? She also introduced me to things like green funerals. She shared some amazing stories that I hope to actually be able to share down the road at different fireside meetings about.
Oh my gosh, maybe we can have a podcast on green funerals. I have gone down that rabbit hole myself before.
That's funny. I don't run into many people who have.
Well, because no one wants to talk about it because they're going to look at, they're going to get some weird looks.
Right.
But I just feel, I guess because I have experienced a lot of loss already, I feel that I wasn't coping well.
Yeah.
There was a huge hole left, and I feel like the whole green funeral / funerals at home funerals, as much as that sounds scary to some people at first, like becoming comfortable and with the natural process of death and welcoming that. I guess it goes back to the problem, the problem is the solution.
Yes.
It's so natural and it's going to happen. If we could find a way to integrate death into more of an acceptance and celebration and it wouldn't feel like such a freaking loss. Like your whole world has been split open and like you can't fit the pieces back together.
Right. Yeah. Yes, it is a rabbit hole. And when I started learning about it, it spoke directly to my soul. And it seems like something that, it just is so natural, and helpful in the grieving process. So
Okay,
we
you
might
can
have
continue now.
yeah, and that goes on into some other stories that I hope to share at Fireside, that I learned a lot from her about different tribes responses or ceremonies, I guess, around grieving, and a lot of different things like that just was, wow, I never thought about it that way. And in our society, our American culture, I guess, responds to grief very differently. So she's just a wealth of information. Highly recommend browsing through her website if you want to learn more about permaculture or a lot of those things, finding your true nature, your true calling, and that sort of thing. Teaching number 2, I briefly mentioned it earlier, but Stoicism. I stumbled upon Stoicism, the philosophy of Stoicism, again, back sort of kind of the same time period when I was just feeling quite lost, purposeless, and not knowing how to deal with just these intense emotions, anger and jealousy and loneliness and all those sort of things. And Stoicism just offered some, it was a great change in mindset of realizing that a lot of our perception, our reality, it's in our minds, and we have control over our minds and how we look at things. And so again, it's another thing you hear a lot about in Stoicism, that the obstacle is the way. The obstacles are our way of upgrading to the next level, so to speak. And so reading Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, it's reading it now, even though their writings were thousands of years ago, it feels like you're reading something that could have been written today. It's so relevant to, I think, what a lot of people are going through and struggling with. And it's all about fortifying your mind, I guess. And then the last teacher, I guess going back to Stoicism for a recommendation, like reading any of those that I mentioned, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, or Seneca. But if you're not ready to just dive into, the meditations of Marcus Aurelius, a great book that I found as a start it's called A Guide to the Good Life, by William Irvine. And it's a real layman's breakdown of what Stoicism is. And then the last teacher, I just recently became familiar with him, is Dr. Michael Heiser. And he's at drmsh.com is his website, but he has a wealth of videos out on, Vimeo, YouTube, etc. He's actually a biblical scholar and an expert in ancient languages. And I recently, this is just a small thing, but I was raised Christian, and I completely abandoned that faith at some point in my life, and for a very, very long time. And only recently, I would say in less than a year, almost a year ago, I started rediscovering it. And I just like I do with all things that interest me, I just started reading the Bible and reading historical things just with a veracity. And he is just a really interesting person that dives into like the actual Hebrew and Greek words and translations that really explains a lot of what you might miss if just reading the Bible in an English translation, not knowing what the historical figures of speech were at the time that, to an ancient Hebrew, it would have made perfect sense because that was just the way people spoke. But in our day, that's not the way we write metaphors and similes anymore, sort of thing. Really interesting information. And he even tackles cool and fringe topics like aliens and, everything you always wanted to know that you thought that, your pastor didn't address or hemmed and hawed around in church. He dives into it. So those are the three teachers that have, or teachings that have really impacted me in the last 7 years.
Well, I am so thankful again for you agreeing to come onto this podcast. Knowing how introverted you were, I was almost sure that you were going to say, I would like to, but I just can't find it within me to do it. So when you said yes, I was like, I just knew it was meant to be. And I appreciate the love that you're putting out there. So I look forward to our shenanigans in the future.
Oh gosh, I completely forgot to use the word shenanigans. I was so focused on what we were talking about, but I guarantee there will be shenanigans in the future.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Kristin, so much for joining me in Sheffy's Sandbox. Much love to you.
Thank you.
All right, so Kristin, that's where I'm going to stop the recording.
All right.
And I am so happy.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed this very much. I love